Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to do a product review on the Craft Resin Low Viscosity Epoxy Resin. First, I will give you some information about Craft Resin and how to use it. Then I will explain some of the projects it works best for and do a sample project for you using the product. I am going to make a wine butler with 2 matching coasters, and I'll use multiple pigments to see how they interact with Craft Resin. Craft resin is a low viscosity resin, so it is important to learn a little bit about viscosity before deciding whether this is the right product for you. Viscosity defines the flowability of a liquid. Low viscosity resins are thinner and runnier, whereas high viscosity resins are thicker. Here's a practical example. Water is a low viscosity liquid, whereas oil would be a medium viscosity liquid and something like lard would be high viscosity. The viscosity of craft resin is similar to that of honey. Low viscosity resins like craft resin are great for a variety of projects. Some of those include casting projects, sealing wood and other materials, paintings, sculptures, jewelry, encapsulating objects, and layered deep pours. Craft resin has great bubble release, which is great for crystal clear resin art pieces. Here's some information about timing and temperature. The working time of craft resin is 45 minutes. The ideal working temp is 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and the cure time is 24 hours. As far as UV and yellowing goes, craft resin is great. It's got both Hals protection and UV stabilizers. Most epoxy resins on the market today have UV filters to protect against yellowing. However, Hals protection is top of the line for UV protection, and craft resin contains this. Notably, all epoxy resins yellow over time, even if they have UV filters and Hals protection. To prevent this, keep your projects out of direct sunlight to keep them as clear as possible for as long as possible. With regard to toxicity, craft resin is odorless, non-flammable, and free of VOCs and solvents. Craft resin is also food safe, but this is for incidental food contact, which means that once the craft resin is cured and has fully hardened, your resin project can be used safely as a food contact surface. Craft resin was tested by a third party for leaching and migration, and it passed all the testing, so when you use it as directed, the fully cured resin will not leach any substances into the food that it comes into contact with. This being said, don't use your resin projects as a cutting board or to prepare food in. Epoxy resin projects are great as decorative pieces or to serve something like cheese and crackers on. All of this being said, it is still very important to always wear proper PPE when using any sort of epoxy resin. The most basic PPE you can use while working with epoxy resin are gloves and respirator masks. If you would like more information about the products I recommend, see the link in the description below. Craft resin is also self-leveling, crystal clear, and cures to 100% solid. So now let's start our project. First, I'll give you some mixing instructions. Craft resin should be mixed at a 1-to-1 ratio. As you can see here, I pour the resin into one cup and the hardener into another cup, ensuring that I have equal amounts in both. I then pour both the hardener and the resin into a mixing cup, ensuring that I scrape all the hardener and resin out of the individual cups. Whether mixing by hand or using a machine, it is important that you mix the resin slowly to prevent air from entering the mixture, causing air bubbles. Let's get started making our wine butler and coaster set. I'm going to use a variety of pigments here to see how they interact with the craft resin. First up is a popular pigment used with epoxy resin, acrylic paint. It mixed really well and I was really happy with the final color. Here, I am just adding some clear resin into the project. Next, I am using a salmon-colored resin dye. The resin dye worked extremely well with the craft resin, and I definitely recommend using this pigment in your projects. Next, I used some craft resin colored with pigment powder. Remember, when using pigment powders, a little bit goes a long way. For the beige color, I used white casting craft and paint, which also worked really well. Here, I am using a torch to pop any air bubbles in my resin. Be careful when using torches on silicone molds because your final project may end up sticking when you demold. It's safer to use a heat gun or a regular lighter. Here I am just adding any remaining resin that I have left over. And you can see how the colors are moving in towards the center of the mold. That's usually what I look for in a low viscosity resin. It means that the effects are going to be really neat when we demold. One of the last pigments I used was alcohol ink because it's a very popular pigment used with epoxy resin. And again, it worked extremely well. Here I am using some colored beads in the center of each of my molds to add a little extra bling to the final project. I come in with a little stick here to pull some of the colors in towards the center, even though the resin did a great job of doing this all by itself. After a final blast of heat to pop some of those bubbles, I let the project cure overnight and we are ready to demold. This piece of the project is my favorite out of the three. There are so many effects in there and the colors look pretty cool together. Here's a close-up video so you can see the extent of the effects that I'm talking about. Thank you so much for watching, and if this review was beneficial to you or you enjoyed watching me work, remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.